I'm excited about this presentation in particular because, number one, the whole topic of human dynamics in the workplace, personally, I think of all the possible business topics, this is the one that's just most inherently interesting. And so for me, because it is what I write about and it's what I speak about, I find it just fascinating to always get a chance to talk about that. And I'm amazed at how little actual ink, both physical and digital ink, this topic gets in the business press. It gets some, it definitely gets some, but when you compare that to all of the other business topics, they get tons of attention and resources. This one just gets a very modest amount of attention. So to be able to share this with you and to talk about it is inherently exciting for me. Secondly, it's intriguing for me to be able to present to a group of business leaders because I think this topic is probably most relevant to you. It's relevant to anybody, even when you first get out of college and have your first job. Obviously, human dynamics are relevant. But I think the way it works for most of us is when we first have our serious first job, for the most part, the way we create value is through work. We get in the trenches, we dig, we work, we do. And hopefully from that work, we gain new skills, gain new competencies. And as we move into our mid-career, those skills and competencies that we've gained in the first 5, 10 years, we leverage those to keep the career progressing. But at a certain point, as you move into leadership roles, you are certainly competent, you certainly have skills, but so does everyone else. And so how do you separate yourself and continue your career accelerating and progressing? Yeah, you can to some degree get a little more competent, develop a few more skills, but when I look at all of the business leadership literature and all of the effort that's put into helping people become better leaders, it's all certainly good, but that doesn't always translate into career acceleration or career progress. Many of you probably know people, maybe people in your own life directly, who are exceptional leaders, but when you look at the actual trajectory of their careers, it doesn't necessarily match with what you see as their capabilities as a leader. And I think the area of human dynamics, not only human dynamics applied to everyone else, but human dynamics applied to ourselves, is a big determinant of how much our career continues to accelerate past that mid-career point. So I'm excited because you guys are right in that sweet spot of people for whom this can really serve well in terms of the next stage or two in your career. And then finally, just because of who you are, I am a huge consumer of what you produce. Reading, radio, TV, online, every day I'm consuming New York Post, Wall Street Journal, Fox News, Fox Business Network, and other resources that you're producing. So to me, it's almost like coming to Oz and stepping behind the green curtain to see the wizards that create the magic. And I realize once you're behind the curtain, sometimes it doesn't seem so magical. I get that. But it's still fascinating. I even had to do kind of the nerdy thing. I walked up, had to take a picture of the NewsCorp building, because there is a certain, just a sense of, wow, this is a cool place because I'm absorbing their stuff every single day. So for all those reasons, I'm excited about this. And even though I come to New York a couple times a year for a variety of reasons, this one was kind of special because, of course, this presentation, but also it's my first trip back to Manhattan after the publication of the book Workplace Poker. So I'll give you an idea of what I had in my mind it was going to be like. I thought it was going to be something like this, where I arrive and in Times Square, a huge banner, and obviously it's not that exactly. But I did go to the local Barnes & Noble just to make sure they're carrying the book, which they are, but they're almost out. They had one copy left, so and I had forgotten mine, so I had to buy one from them because I wanted to review some stories last night. And so they're left without anything. So I had to talk to the lady to make sure that they were going to reorder because even though it's a little thing, it's still a big thing. So I have a few things I want to share with you about me. I don't want to spend much time at all about my bio or background because we only have an hour, and we have a lot of things that we want to get through. But there are two critical things that I do want to share with you about myself and my background because they inform what you'll read in the book, and they inform even what you'll experience here in the next hour or so. My serious career after my formal education began in the U.S. Navy. So I was a submariner. I served in the nuclear engineering department on the USS Goodall, a fast attack nuclear submarine. So I was one of the nukes in the back half of the submarine, keeping the engines running while the guys in the front were making sure we were pointed in the right direction, essentially. And that, I spent 6 years in the U.S. Navy. This is over 25 years ago, but it was my first serious work experience, and it was the hardest work that I've ever done. And what I tell people about that experience is that it was, for me, an immersion in the real world of work. Sometimes in the white-collar world, where I've lived for the last 20 years or so, we get this illusion that we're actually working hard, and we are, to some degree, we're working hard, but that's the world where people, they just break their backs in terms of really hard work. And it was a great setting of a standard for me in terms of hard work. So that's where I started. Where I ended in terms of my formal employment experience was just before publication of Workplace Poker. I ended my employment with GE, and I was the GE corporate training leader for GE Capital. And I had spent 5 years with GE Capital delivering and developing training for all of the GE Capital businesses in the US and Canada. So I spent a lot of time in Canada, a lot of time in various locations throughout the US. And it was a great immersion in the sort of the big company, white-collar world of training and development. And between those two bookends, I've spent 25 years in small businesses, in big businesses. I've been an employee. I've been a contractor in terms of delivering training. And hopefully, if you've had a chance to read any bit of the book, you can see how that immersion in the real world of work definitely informs the stories in the book and the content within the book. So there's nothing in there, and there's nothing this afternoon that's theoretical or pie in the sky. If anything, I try to be extremely focused on what can people learn today that they can apply today in their real world. And the other thing I try to do is make sure that the tone of the content is fun, interesting, amusing, because if you're not really focused on making it interesting and fun, this topic can become really dry and almost frustrating, because it's really easy to devolve into basically bitching about how tough office politics is, or when I got taken advantage of in this situation or that situation. So we try to keep it fun and light and interesting, and in order to keep people engaged. And I think we also learn better when we're in that kind of place. So think for a moment about back to your early days when you were going through college and you were learning about what to expect from the world of work. Without it necessarily being overtly said, most of us come away from our college experience, and even our first serious job, with this implied deal where if you work hard, if you keep your head down, if you don't focus on office politics, if you don't get involved in all that minutia, just do a good job. Be talented, be hardworking, be a good team player, help us achieve whatever our business objectives are. If you do that, then you will have a good career. You wait your turn, take your time, keep your head down. And sometimes that works, sometimes. So there's this sense of just cooperate. Cooperate with the business objectives, cooperate with what your boss wants you to do, cooperate with what the business wants you to do, and life's going to be okay. After 5, 10, 15 years, sometimes we start to hear the rumblings in the distance, or we see or hear of situations where it doesn't quite seem to work that way all the time. Sometimes the wrong people, quote, wrong people seem to get promoted, or sometimes the people who are laid off don't seem to be the ones who should be laid off if you're really focused on business objectives. And when that happens, for the most part, what the business wants us to do is ignore those rumblings. Just keep your head down. Just do your job. We don't want you all acting like mercenaries. We don't want you all out for yourselves. Because if you're all mercenaries saying, well, I'm in it for number one. And yeah, I'll take on that tough project. But I need to know, if I take on that tough project that has a high likelihood of failure, are you going to protect me? Am I going to be okay? Am I really going to be okay? And it's really not whether you tell me. I look at the last 3 or 4 tough projects that failed, and I look and see, well, what happened to those folks? And if they're not around anymore, or if their careers have been flatlined, then I'm not going to be the one who steps forward to take the bullet on a tough project that has a high likelihood of failure. Over time, we all get that sensitivity to how does it really work in the real world. And I think the people who are most successful in their careers long term get that sense very quickly. And it's not good or bad. As much as I talk about how we have the real world versus the way they tell us it should be, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad one way or the other. It's just a recognition of reality. But sometimes, if you don't recognize the reality, you can fall into the trap of essentially being a hamster on the hamster wheel, where you are working hard and you're thinking, okay, I'm ambitious, I want to get to the next step, I want to get to the next level, so I have to either work harder or I have to develop new talents. And at a certain point, okay, I've read all the books that I can. Okay, I'll read another book, and then another one. And I'll try to get even a little more productive. Maybe I'll get really good at managing my email. I'll get really good at managing projects. I'll get really good at all these things. And when you put all that effort into productivity, and the result coming back at you isn't what you expect it to be, or isn't as much as you think it should be, it can drive you nuts. So what we want to acknowledge this afternoon is that there is another game. It's not a better game, it's not a worse game, it's what I call the game under the game. And you have to be cautious when you listen to career advice, even from me. You are the expert on you. So as we go through some stuff this afternoon, and even as you read the book, you're the expert on you. So just because billionaires, and I forget, is Elizabeth Holmes still a billionaire? No? Okay, so she might have to come off the list. But the reason she made the list, because she was famously quoted 6 months ago as, I'm going to bastardize her quote, but it was essentially, if you have a backup plan, that means you're not committed to your plan. I'm thinking she's scratching her head thinking now, a backup plan might not have been such a bad idea. Steve Jobs is on here because I sat in a meeting, it was almost 10 years ago. A marketing director was pounding his fist on the table, trying to explain to his marketing team, we don't need market research. Steve Jobs never used market research. We just need good instincts. And he was adamant. And he had a marketing team, and I sat there. I was the training guy. I was delivering a team building workshop, and it didn't go well. But I remember at that time thinking, he actually believes this. He buys this. And what's happened is he's just overly interpreted the story of Steve Jobs. And with any of these folks who are billionaires, you just have to recognize, and I'm a big Sheryl Sandberg fan, I like her material, but even with her, you have to recognize the air that she breathes is different than the air you breathe. And the world she works in is different than the world you work in. So her concepts, unfortunately, I've had some people that I've met who've taken lean in too far. And you can almost see after they read the book, they come to work. They're not just leaning in, they're leaning on. They're leaning into, and and if it becomes too obvious and off-putting, you almost work against yourself. So the point of this is just to say, you are the expert on you. You have to take all of this information in and decide, what am I going to apply, what is not relevant to me. And I would suggest, my hope would be that at the end of even this hour, each of you finds something. There won't always be the same things, but some of you will take this idea, some of you will take another idea, that you find something that compels you, and it just says, yeah, you know what, I can take this to the office this afternoon and begin to apply it. Because my focus is, I like the word mercenary, because each of you does need to be a mercenary. Each of you has to pay attention to your own star, to your own rising star. And if you don't do it for yourself, no one else is going to do it for you. So you'll see the focus of my work is career advancement, career acceleration at the individual level, not the broad business level, but really for individuals. And with that said, one of the examples, how many of you have seen the Matrix movies? Some of you? Okay, a few of you. Well, if you've seen the Matrix movies, the essence of this storyline is that there are two worlds. There's a world on the surface where everything looks normal, everything looks fine, everyone looks like New York City, basically. But underneath the surface, everyone's a computer program. And when you look at the Matrix, everyone is digitized. And in fact, the storyline is that there's this world under the world. But at a certain point, when Keanu Reeves begins to see there are two different worlds, he's given a choice, the red pill or the green pill. And the choice he's really making is, do you want to live in that comfortable world where everything seems normal? It's not reality, but it feels normal and it seems normal. Or do you want to take the other pill where now suddenly you get to see reality, but reality may be uncomfortable, it may be painful, it may be confusing, you may not be sure what to do. And so when we talk about the game and the game under the game, it's really the same choice. You can choose just to work in the comfortable world that feels like, okay, you know what, my turn will come. Eventually, if I just keep working hard, my turn will eventually come. Or you can peel the layer away and say, no, I'm going to look at the real world. And sometimes then, it's uncomfortable. And because it is more complicated, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's simply a choice. My goal is really to encourage you to take both pills. You live in one world, you live in the other world, you live in both at the same time. But if you're going to live in both worlds and really focus on human dynamics in the workplace, then you have to be what I call a corporate anthropologist, where you do study humanity at work. An anthropologist, anthropology is the study of human beings throughout millennia. Here we have an example of the skeleton or skeletons of the victims of ritual human sacrifice from about 1,500 years ago. And if you commit yourself to a study of humanity, you have to acknowledge that there is a huge part of humanity that is prone to violence, and prone to violence focused on each other. Whether it's the Viking Norsemen, whether it is the Mayans, there is plenty of evidence that we are violent killers. There's also evidence that we are incredibly compassionate people, that we have this ability to sacrifice for others with no expectation of any kind of reward on our end. Sometimes we make the ultimate sacrifice with no expectation of reward on our end. A Jungian duality of characteristics that's built into every single one of us, this ability to be incredibly compassionate and generous, and this ability to be incredibly competitive, and if not a killer, at least being willing to compete against other people. We even see it in the modern day world of sports, and it's not just male sports, it's also female sports. It's amazing how popular mixed martial arts with women has become. And it's not just men in the audience. There are tons of women in the audience that are enjoying that type of competitiveness. So, with that said, just because you put people in an office and we're all dressed up, our hair is nicely done, we brush our teeth, we put on deodorant, we wear nice shoes, we all smile and we cooperate with each other, that's great. And you don't ever want to forget that there is inherently a competitive aspect to every single one of us. Not that I expect any of you to be like kicking each other under the table, but there is a competitive aspect. And one of the great stories that I heard a couple of years ago, Megan Postrom and her roommate in college, Janelle, were great friends at college, great roommates. Megan still says to this day, Janelle was the best roommate that she ever had, mostly because Megan, they were both accounting majors. Megan was your classic accounting student, 4.0, very studious. Janelle, not so much. Her GPA wasn't all that high, but she had a great time in college. She was involved in a lot of social activities, met a lot of guys. In fact, Megan will tell you that she probably wouldn't have dated if it wasn't for meeting the guys that Janelle had already either dated or was in some way connected to. So there was a lot of affection between the two of them, except at the end of their senior year when they were both beginning to interview for serious jobs. They were interviewing for some similar positions, and Megan was, now I heard this story 8 years later, but Megan will tell you that she was scratching her head because Janelle actually got a job at a company that Megan really wanted to work for. It was fast growing. Accounting wasn't viewed as just a support activity, but it was actually viewed as a kind of a strategic activity within the business. There was a nice career path, and Janelle got a job there. Low-level job, but she got a job there. Megan ended up getting a fine job. In fact, didn't really feel anything bad about the job that she got. And they drifted apart for about 8 years. 8 years later, they met again. They were both in Boston. And they reconnected and began to socialize and went out a few times. And Janelle invited Megan over to her apartment one night, and they were having a couple of glasses of wine, just sitting and talking. And it was at that point, because of the comfort of distance and time, Megan finally felt comfortable saying, so what happened? How did you, and Megan was sensitive, she said, not saying that you didn't, deserve it, but how did you get that job? Did you know somebody? Did you, and Janelle laughed and said, no, I didn't sleep with anybody. I didn't do it. There was nothing nefarious. But Janelle walks to a closet, pulls out a binder about 3 inches thick, and shows Megan the portfolio that she used when she was going out on job interviews. And the portfolio included some documentation from when Janelle was a Girl Scout, and she set the record in her community for selling Girl Scout cookies. It even had a spreadsheet of what she had done in terms of her cookie sales. There were records from when she was on the swimming team, and again, some data from how she kept improving on the swim team, and how she used data to always track herself and track her progress. She managed to present her college experience. She was involved in so many social groups and social activities, not as a leader, but as a participant. And she had evidence, she had documents, and basically as you go through that portfolio, you get the impression, here's someone who is very active, very engaged socially, but also very good at her job, or who could be very good at her job, who has real leadership capability, even though she wasn't necessarily in classic leadership positions in these student groups. Megan also noticed that there were letters from professors, which we all would include in a portfolio if we're interviewing, but some of the professors with whom Janelle had the lowest GPA or really struggled with grades, gave her some really strong recommendations. And Megan asked about that, and Janelle had worked that. She knew in some of those classes, I'm not doing well, so if I'm not doing well, I need to make sure that the professor at least likes me, at least knows that I'm trying, knows that I'm pushing myself to try and make it work. And she ended up getting some really good letters of recommendation for some classes that she didn't do all that great in. And in the end, the portfolio was part of what helped Janelle land the job. And here's the ultimate point of the story, because when Megan asks, well, why didn't you show this to me then? This would have been great to know about then. And Janelle said, well, the whole reason I put this together was because I knew I was competing against what we called you 4.0 Megan. And I knew I was going after some of the same jobs. I needed something to have an edge. And again, with time, it wasn't anything that Megan was annoyed or frustrated by. It was more of a learning experience for her, where she realized, even in an environment that seems so cooperative, that seems like we're in this together, we're roommates, we like each other, we swap boyfriends, I mean, we're in this together, there's still a competitive aspect, and that's the way the world works. In the book, there's an entire chapter on reading people. And how do you read people well in the workplace? And the workplace makes it tough because, again, there's all this artificial stuff that causes us to have impressions of people, the way they're dressed, the way they walk, the way they talk, what they do for their job. And over time, as we get used to people, the people you are closest to are oftentimes the people you have the lowest ability to read, because once you've decided that you like someone, or once you've decided that they're an honest, hardworking person, or vice versa, once you've decided that they're a jerk, or in any way, once you've made a judgment about somebody, you lose much of your ability to truly read them. It's one of the reasons why psychopaths are amazing at reading people, because they have absolutely no empathy. And I'm not recommending that you be a psychopath. But because of their total lack of empathy, their total lack of emotional connection, when they look at you, when they interact with you, it's almost like they're observing an animal in the wild. It's almost, they're just, and so they notice a lot of things that the rest of us just sort of let blow over. So when you think about your emotions, in the workplace, again, positive or negative, I use Jane Goodall as an example of someone to emulate, because Jane Goodall, when she was in her heyday in the 70s and 80s and she was observing chimpanzees in the wild, in her journals, she would very objectively note all kinds of behavior, some of it very loving and kind, but some of it horrendously violent. Chimpanzees killing each other, chimpanzees stealing each other's babies, killing each other's babies, doing other things that were just horrible. And she would dutifully note those things in an objective way, not judgmental at all. And to some degree, in a corporate environment, what I recommend is that we all find a way to channel our inner Jane Goodall, where we observe the people around us and we find ways to separate ourselves emotionally, not all the time. I realize that who wants to work in an environment like that where we're all separated emotionally. Part of what serves us and makes a work environment fun and engaging is we are connected with each other. But there is a time and a place for that, and there's a time and a place to step back and say, okay, what do I really see in these people? In fact, I would say, well, let me ask you, how many of you know someone in your work environment who just frustrates you or drives you nuts? How many of you know at least one person? Just raise your hands. Don't point. Just raise your hands. So if you know someone like that who just drives you nuts, if you want to develop that ability to be objective with people, to step back from your emotions and see people more clearly, you can do it one of two ways. You can take the people who are just mildly annoying and you can practice on them, or you can accelerate your learning and take that one person, the one that you are sure is incompetent, he or she doesn't deserve to be where he or she is, and every interaction that you have with that person is dissatisfying for some reason, and so you end up finding ways to avoid them or not interact with them because you just can't stand the frustration that rises up in you. I would recommend take that person or someone else in your business or personal life who really drives you crazy and say to yourself, I'm going to be Jane Goodall with that person for a week. It's not realistic to try to do it forever, but if you take a week or two and you just say, I'm going to step back, and those characteristics that drive me crazy with that person, I'm just going to step back and ask myself, why might that be? Why would this person be the way they are? And I'm going to observe carefully. When I find myself getting frustrated, I'm going to step back from that. I'm going to consciously choose not to have those negative or frustrating emotions about that person and to see what gets revealed to me. And over time, if you give it a week or two with someone like that, you will oftentimes come to a level of empathy that you didn't have before. You'll see them a little more clearly. It doesn't, in the end, they're still going to be frustrating. So I'm not saying that you will come to a point where, oh, now you trust them and it's all rainbow and sunshine. Probably not. But you'll be better able to see who they really are. I had not my direct boss, but my boss's boss years ago, who I couldn't connect with him. He was abrasive, borderline abusive with people. I really struggled to understand how he could be the way he was, and yet my boss had a really positive working relationship with him, but every interaction I had with him was just horrendous, so I avoided him at all costs. And finally one day I sat down with my boss and I just said, how do you do it? How do you get through a day interacting so much with this particular person? And he said, well, I know his story. And he said, I know the story that he doesn't tell to anybody else. But, and real quickly, his story essentially was one of, prior to the business they were currently in, he had a huge failure at the previous business. And it was embarrassing. It was actually, I should have just looked it up online, because once I did look it up online, it was a high-profile failure, and he was under a lot of pressure to make this company work, to make things happen at this company. And my boss just said, I see the pressure on his face. And I said, he and I, we've even talked about it. It doesn't really do any good, but he's under that pressure every single day. And so I feel a little bad for him. Now, does that make it easier? A little bit. Doesn't make it easy, because he's as much of a jerk to me as he is to anybody else. But just by having that little bit of understanding of who he is, I can walk home at the end of the day and I don't feel like I have to kick my dog in order to get over whatever anxiety he's created in me. So sometimes by taking the time just to observe a little more carefully, learn who people really are, develop a little more empathy, that can help you read them better, and it can also help you keep yourself a little more sane as your work day or work week progresses. When it comes to reading people, one of the stories that I share in Workplace Poker is the story of Cherie Washington. And it's a great story, it's a sad story. Cherie Washington was about 10 years out of college, IT project manager for a firm in Silicon Valley. She headed up really all IT development for a high growth company. And what she was known for was absolute commitment to projects being completed on time, on budget, with exactly the specs that were agreed to at the beginning of the project. In order to make that happen, and in order to manage a large group, you did not show up late to one of her meetings. If you showed up late to one of her meetings, you got like one chance, you got a stern talking to, and it wasn't going to happen a second time. Every one of her meetings, and not just her meetings, she demanded that meetings throughout her department, they start on time and they end 10 minutes early. Because she thought this through. You can't start meetings on the hour and end meetings on the hour and expect people to be to their next meeting. So all of her meetings lasted 50 minutes, and they ended at 10 minutes prior to the hour, giving people to get to the next meeting or next whatever. And there were a whole litany of other things that she did to manage the process within her team. And to her credit, they accomplished great things. They put out great product. And she was definitely a high rising star with this particular Silicon Valley firm. I met her when she had been given a new assignment, because since she was a rising star, as a stretch leadership assignment, she was shifted over to lead the commercial team, the sales and marketing team. This is going to be really a leadership opportunity and position her for a serious senior leadership role ultimately with the company. And because I was delivering some consultative sales training for that particular group, I met her briefly. But I met a fair number of people who were interacting with her on the commercial team at that time. And she came into this new assignment with the same mentality and the same mindset that she had applied to the IT department. First, she wanted a detailed pipeline analysis. She wanted to know, every deal that was in progress and what the status was, and she wanted to immerse herself in the data. And she began to treat the commercial function like a project management function. And not in a dumb way. She's a very bright person, not in a dumb way at all. But she felt no need to spend too much one-on-one time with any of the commercial leaders who now reported to her. She knew them. She'd worked with the company for a long time. She knew these folks. It wasn't like she felt she needed to take them out for drinks or get to know them at any deeper level, because she didn't know any of her IT folks at that kind of level. Long story short with Cherie, within 9 months, how did they phrase it? They decided to align her leadership development with her core competencies. That was the phrase. And what they basically did is they shifted her back to IT. And they decided she just wasn't a good fit for the commercial function. And what had happened is she didn't take the time to understand who those people were. And in fact, there was some conflict that was created because in the IT world that she had worked in, rarely was anyone coming and pushing back on her. I mean, this was project management. You agreed to the project specs up front. You manage the project. No one comes to you questioning, does this product really need to do this? Or she just wasn't used to that. Whereas in the commercial world, there was lots of questioning going on regarding allocation of resources, how they were going to manage the creative staff, the marketing staff, the sales staff, et cetera. And she didn't handle the pushback well. Long story short, she just didn't read the situation. But if you talk to her today, and as I was writing the book, I decided, okay, I can't tell this story without at least reaching out to see, okay, what's her mindset now? Because it's about 8-10 years later. She is just convinced that the good old boys network screwed her over, that they were never going to let her succeed, and the only lesson she's taken away is don't do something like that again, particularly if no one has your back. So in her mind, that's all that happened. Nobody had her back, and when things got a little tough, she was just shifted back to her previous role. When in fact, had she looked at it a little more deeply, she would understand that really what happened is there was a whole skill set that she didn't have, but could have developed, could have taken the time to develop. Could she have had better coaching? Absolutely. Could the senior leadership team have done a better job of recognizing, okay, we're taking you from this kind of role to this kind of role. Let's set you up to succeed. Of course, it could have happened. I mean, that would have been better. But in reality, the world most of us work in is no one's watching out for us that way. We're given an opportunity. And if we're lucky, we've got someone who's really paying close attention and says, you know what, you're set up to succeed except for these couple of areas. Let's help you in those areas. But that's more the exception than the rule. So, but what I do like about this Sherry Washington story is it doesn't have a neat, happy ending. It has kind of a rough, uncomfortable ending. And what I found as I was writing the book and gathering stories for the book, those were actually the best. Those were the real learning opportunity stories, as opposed to the fairy tale ending where in the end everyone's fine and everything works out the way in storybooks we hope that it will. Those were also the toughest stories to acquire because no one likes to tell their story when it has like ugly laundry at the end where things just didn't work out. What we want is we want to tell that nice, happy ending story. And so what you'll find in the book is a lot of the uglier stories where things don't always work out neatly. And I really think that's where a huge amount of the ultimate learning from the book occurs. So that's the Sherry Washington story. I use a concept in the book called Teflon rhinos versus Velcro butterflies. And what I mean by a Teflon rhino, that's someone who is impervious to the opinions of others, who basically, if you don't like them, they don't really care. If you don't like their idea, whatever. If you don't like the way they manage, fine, you know what, deal with it. Teflon rhinos, you can make a case that it's better to be a Teflon rhino than what I call a Velcro butterfly. A butterfly is emotionally speaking, is someone who, oh man, if you just look at them the wrong way, they begin interpreting, well, what did that glance mean? Oh, did you not like the report? Well, you said you liked it, but you didn't say you loved it. So butterflies in the workplace have their own issues. But what we mean by, again, a Teflon rhino is someone who is able to take the knocks and keep moving forward. And I'm not recommending that any of us be Teflon rhinos. I think there's a mid-zone, probably closer to the Teflon rhino than the Velcro butterfly. Because what I see in people who are Velcro butterflies is they not only are impacted by the negative opinions of others, the negative perceptions of others, they tend to store the negative experiences up. They save them up over time. And after a while, all that negative stuff is attached to them, and they become less and less and less secure over time. And the greatest example I've had regarding a Velcro butterfly is someone who initially appeared to be a Teflon rhino. I did some leadership development training in Kuwait a few years ago, and specifically for KNPC, the Kuwaiti National Petroleum Company. And in the group, there were, I want to say 70% men, 30% women. And it was interesting because some of the women were very traditionally dressed, but some of the women were dressed just like you are today. So there was a mix within the group. But there was one woman, Samia, who in our discussions prior to the workshop itself, as I was asking the senior leadership, what do you want out of this particular workshop? What do you want each of them to get out of this? The challenge that they were having with Samia was that she was so abrasive with other people, that anytime there was a discussion where there was a disagreement, she was on the attack. She was someone who would defend her position to the nth degree, and most of the time she was right. In fact, I had several people say, she's always right. I mean, not just in her perception, she is always right. The challenge is she is so abrasive in the delivery of her rightness that we don't want to deal with her. With her, if you agree with her, it's sweetness and sunshine. If you disagree with you, it's a battle to the death. So most of them had learned to compensate by just not dealing with her at all. And the reason she was in this leadership workshop was because she had recently been passed over for a promotion. And she was, oh man, she was angry. Because it was a promotion in her mind that she absolutely deserved. She'd put in the time, she had the competency, she had the ability. And so as part of the leadership workshop, we divide people up into small groups, and then ultimately we would do some one-on-one coaching with each individual. And of course, we decided that I would be assigned to Samia to do one-on-one coaching with her. And the part of the coaching is to just sit down and have the other person just talk to me about your work. What do you like? What frustrates you? And what's working well? What's not working well? And try to get a sense of her self-perception. To what degree was her perception of herself accurate? Well, Samia's challenge was that she fully acknowledged that she was an abrasive person when people disagreed with her, but she felt she had to be abrasive because nobody respected her. And as we began to talk, she went back. She worked for KNPC for almost 20 years. She went back 18 years, and she could recount for me a whole series of events where she had been wronged here, she'd been passed over there, and you can understand it's the Middle East, so women, aren't always, and Kuwait, as modern as it is compared to Saudi Arabia, it's still pretty challenging in terms of the environment for women. But today, it's much more modern than it was 20 years ago. So imagine a young Samia, she's in the work world, she's passed over, she's treated poorly, and she was a Velcro butterfly. She was collecting up every grievance, everything that went wrong, everything that wasn't right. And by the time I met her, it was almost 2 decades of these grievances. And now what was happening is she was convinced nobody respected her. When you talked to the men, they would say, we have great respect for her, but she's so abrasive, we can't work with her. Well, the reason she was abrasive is she was convinced nobody respected. It was like this insolvable problem. And luckily, we actually ended up, I went out to dinner with her and her husband, because I was there for 2 weeks, developed not really a friendship, but a closeness, enough where we could have genuine dialogue. And because I was a third party from the outside, she could feel comfortable being more open to me, and we had some pretty, I think, decent discussions. And over time, it didn't happen in 2 weeks, but over the course of the last couple of years, as I've continued to reach out to her and we've continued to have dialogue and conversations, she's come to more of an understanding, not a perfect understanding, but more of an understanding of how her accumulation of these grievances is actually hurting her and hurting her career. So she's worked to become a little less judgmental, a little less abrasive, but because it's almost 20 years of accumulation, after a while, the abrasiveness becomes your personality. Before it was just a reaction, and after a while it becomes who you are. But her husband said at home, she's incredibly sweet and kind. He said the only time that she's not sweet and kind at home, he knows when she's had a bad day because she'll come home very quiet, and then she'll break down and cry. I mean, she truly is a Velcro butterfly who appears to be a Teflon rhino because she works in this environment where she feels she has to be so tough, but in fact, it's just killing her, this perceived lack of respect. So, and in fact, you can't really tell. This is her right here. And so what I've been told, I went back one time, and then I haven't been back since. What I've been told is that she did get a promotion a few years later, and her career is, if not on track, it's at least beginning to progress more to her liking. But at a certain point, we're human beings. We only have a limited lifespan. I don't think she'll ever get back that 20 years, unfortunately. So she can course correct. But what would have been great is if 15 years ago, 20 years ago, she had had the kind of coaching that she got 5 years ago instead. So I would ask that you just think about any grievances that you've experienced over the course of your career, anything that's happened where you feel I was wronged, I was put upon, this isn't fair, it wasn't right. You're probably exactly correct. I wouldn't argue with you at all. But then ask yourself, what reaction serves me? And if holding on, if it serves you, fine. I'm not going to argue with you. But if holding on to it doesn't serve you and your career ambition, I'm not here to be a therapist. I'm saying if you need it, get therapy. If you need it, get help. Or just find a way to think your way through it and let it go. Find a way to let it go in order to free yourself up to the path that you really want to be headed upon. And I realize in a 1-hour afternoon lunch and learn session, you can only go so deep into issues like this. But I would just say I meet so many people who are held back by this false memory of other things that have happened. And if you can just let those things go, it can free you up to move forward, whatever that means to you. we're going to talk a little bit about self-promotion. When you hear the word self-promotion, what's the most common adjective that you think of to describe self-promotion? He was, well, toot your own horn, or if he was a blank self-promoter. Blatant or shameless. So shameless is what I hear most of the time. Think about that. So we hear this phrase, shameless self-promotion, and we find that to be notable, which means we think that self-promotion is almost inherently like shameful behavior. Because when it's shameless, when someone's just promoting themselves, man, that's weird, that's odd, that's a little uncomfortable. Those of you, and I'm acknowledging no political leaning here at all, but those of you who are frustrated or put off by Donald Trump, many of you are just put off by that style, by that shameless, over self-promotion. And some of us think, when we use the term self-promotion, that that's what we mean. But in the workplace, if you've ever worked with anyone like that in the real world of work, that doesn't work. When you've got someone who's just so blatantly and overtly promoting themselves again and again and again, most of us tend to discount almost anything that they have to say. So what I've learned is that the really incredible self-promoters at work, none of us think of them as self-promoters. We just think of them as good colleagues to work with. But many of them have very specific strategies that they use in terms of self-promotion in the workplace. I'll share a couple of quick tips with you. But these tips were also hard to extract because I knew some people that I wanted to interview because I'd either worked with them or I heard about them. And I knew they were well respected within their companies. I knew they had earned that respect. And I wanted to find out, okay, was this part of a strategy? Do you think about this? And initially, most of them said, oh, no. I don't really think about self-promotion. What they would say is, I just focus on doing a good job. I just focus on keeping my head down and making sure my departments run right, whatever. I'd roll my eyes secretly, and I'd say, okay, but we know a lot of other people who do the same thing and didn't achieve the kind of career trajectory that you achieved. So what are some of the things that you've done just to make sure that when you do good work, it gets noticed, that the right people notice the good work? Those interviews were really tough to extract out the practical wisdom. But whenever I would get it, you could almost hear the angels singing. And I'll give you one example. This is my favorite example just because it was so hard to finally get her to acknowledge it. What she finally said was, most of the people in most businesses are willing to echo a good thought in a meeting, but they're uncomfortable with the idea of stepping forward with their own good thought. Once someone else has it, they're comfortable echoing it or refining it or making an adjustment to it, but those people who are echoes don't get the kind of credit that the person who was the initial deliverer of the good thought. And then she said, even if ultimately the group disagrees or the thought is set aside because it wasn't workable or whatever, the person who put it on the table always gets more recognition than the people who were merely echoes. And the more I thought about it, and then as I asked other people about it and got more examples, it became really clear that as subtle as that is a key distinction in terms of everyday self-promotion. And you want to ask yourself, are you one of those people who is comfortable sometimes, not always, I mean, you can't do this at every meeting, you can't do this on every call, but are you comfortable being one of those people who steps forward with an uncertain idea or a thought, and you're not so sure that everyone's going to accept it? Or are you merely comfortable being an echo of someone else's great thoughts? You are the expert on you. You know where you might land on that particular spectrum. But think about it, and then ask yourself, are there some opportunities to just step forward and share your thought, share your idea? And it doesn't mean that everyone has to love it, but you're just more willing to share your idea. I had a woman who read this chapter on self-promotion, and she was one of the early readers. You send out a bunch of pre-publication copies, and I sent some to some friends and ex-colleagues, and I got a call one day because she had flipped right to that chapter. It's really not the way you're supposed to do it. I explained to her. The book is written to be read in chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, but she went right to the chapter on self-promotion because she knew it was a challenge that she had. And she read through it, and she said, I'm not even finished with it. I was about halfway finished through it. And I just wanted you to know that Monday, I'm in a business meeting, and I normally just sit at a corner. I take lots of notes. I listen carefully. And if I have any thoughts or ideas, she said it was totally unconscious. But I realized after reading the book, I tend to have the ideas, make notes, and then I share them with my boss one-on-one, who's also in the meeting. But I share them with my boss one-on-one, almost as a way of testing whether there's validity there. And then if there's some validity, my boss will take the ideas and we'll do something with them. And she said, I finally decided, no, I'm gonna share in the meeting. And she said it was no big deal. It was just a couple of thoughts or ideas that I had where I shared in the meeting. And that was on Monday. On Wednesday, the CEO of the business, it's a relatively small company, the CEO of the business is in that Monday morning meeting. On Wednesday, she's getting in the elevator, going up to her office, or her cube, and the CEO steps into the elevator with her, and he says, because he's never spoken to her before, never even acknowledged her existence before, and he says, so how long have you been with us? And they had a nice little elevator conversation, up, and then they step out, and he steps out, and they talk for another minute or two. And she said, it was just this amazing thing, as simple as it was, me being willing to share a little more of myself. Suddenly, people are recognizing that I exist in a way. She said, I didn't even realize how invisible I was. But I was, in many ways, my ideas were invisible. And so she said, it's a tiny little thing. But she said to me, Dan, in my world, it's a huge thing to get the recognition for those ideas. She said, now the only thing I have to be careful of, because I know my boss is kind of sensitive to that, because she had shared this same story she was sharing with me with her boss. And it was interesting. The reaction wasn't totally positive. It was almost as if her boss kind of liked it the way it was before. So to her credit, my colleague's sensitivity was that she has to now play that game under the game, and she's going to continue to share her thoughts and ideas, but she also has to be sensitive to the reality in dealing with her own boss. And that is sometimes just the way it is. It's not like you can get frustrated and say, oh, I wish the world was different. This is the way the world is. And as you develop greater ability and flexibility in promoting your own ideas and working with imperfect people, I stole a phrase that I heard from someone, and I included it in the book. Anyone can work with perfect bosses. Anyone can work with colleagues who are smart and talented and hardworking and do everything that we expect them to do. If that was the job, well, other people would have the job, because anyone can do that. It takes a real pro to work with ignorant people, dishonest people, people who don't work hard, who don't do their fair share. If you can develop the ability to work productively with the imperfect people of the world, that's what's going to accelerate your career. So whether it's your bosses or your underlings or your peers, don't get frustrated by their imperfections. That's part of the job, is learning to work with and through those imperfections. Some of you may be people who actively leverage social media. How many of you have a LinkedIn profile that you feel pretty good about? A few. Okay, well, maybe a third of you. I would strongly recommend that you begin to think about your personal social media presence as part of your everyday billboard. And the more because sometimes it's hard to toot our own horn like directly with people, but if I can develop a LinkedIn profile that authentically represents who I am, but also toots my horn in some ways where I may not be able to do it in a comfortable way overtly. Actually, I'll give you a great example. I won an award from a Christian women's conference about 6 months ago, because we had donated some online learning to one of the groups that they support. And we'd done some other work for them, and they sent me a beautiful plaque. And it was one of those things where it's weird, because you've got this nice plaque. I can't tell. It's just weird. How do you tell? How do you say to somebody, hey, by the way, I got this, this nice plaque? But I took a picture of it, and I posted it to my LinkedIn profile. Didn't make a big deal of it. It was just there, and I mentioned what it happened to be. And it's a way of sharing with people things that I've done, things that I've accomplished, recognition that I've received, without having to be too I don't know, too overtly self-promotional about it. So I think that social media gives us a great opportunity in a positive way to promote ourselves. And if you are on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, whatever, some people have this misconception that they can create these two different worlds. The classic two different worlds are Facebook is personal, LinkedIn is professional. That doesn't exist anymore. If you have any social media presence for your own career's sake, you just have to view it all as professional. Now that may mean on Facebook you post personal things, but understand, even if you think that you've got security set up so only your Facebook connections can see them, you can't control what your connections share. You can't control what they copy. So my advice is, when it comes to social media, even when you're posting family-oriented personal things on Facebook, just understand that has the potential to be part of your professional billboard. And the same is true with LinkedIn. Even though that's mostly professional, you're going to have people in your personal life who also access what you present on LinkedIn as well. One of the most recent big mistakes or faux pas that I've seen on Facebook is a veterinarian who is a small animal vet, lovely lady, who also happens to be a bow hunting enthusiast, and had an issue. Did any of you see this? She had an issue with a feral cat in her backyard. So what did she do? She shot the feral cat with a bow. Okay, let's set that aside in terms of judgment. She shot the feral cat with a bow. Turns out the cat was a neighbor's cat that had been lost like a year ago, so it had turned wild. But then she has somebody take a photo of her with the dead cat and the bow. She holds it up and posts it to Facebook. And in her mind, well, that's just my friends. Well, one of her friends thought it would be funny to post that to the friends' Facebook. And it was something that was so awful that it went viral. And then pretty soon, some of her customers at the small animal clinic got wind of this. Long story short, she lost her job. Poor thing. And I don't know. To this day, I don't know if she's been able to get another job as a small animal vet, because it's kind of it's like a don't. Don't kill small animals and post them to Facebook if that's what you want to do for a living. So I know that's an extreme example, but I just share it with you because we have to be sensitive to what we're going to do or not do when it comes to social media and self-promotion. So it's not just tooting your own horn, but also making sure you're not doing anything on the reverse side to create a negative impression for people. And the last thing I want to share with you is the topic of charm. And I talk in the book about the importance of charm and being a charming person if you make the choice to be a charming person. Because the worst thing that you can do in terms of personal warmth and charm is decide you're going to be that way with some people and not with others. You probably know a few people like that, where you can just tell they put on the face. They're so lovely and charming in some environments and just awful and horrendous in other environments. That is not a career booster. If you are going to decide that personal charm and warmth is going to be part of your persona going forward, then you have to be personally warm and charming in virtually every environment. Now, that doesn't mean you can't deliver bad news. You can deliver bad news in a charming way. You can deliver harsh information in a warm, human sort of way. But what I found for myself is that when we were having photographs taken for the book jacket, and I did whatever the photographer said I should do, and we got all the photographs back. And if I'm not careful, I have, what's the phrase, a bitchy resting face? I have the male version of a bitchy resting face. If I'm not careful, it's just sort of like, it's that face. And on photographs, we got a whole bunch of those back from the photographer. And we decided, okay, well, we're going to go back for a second try and try harder to get at least a little bit of a smile. And I'm not saying I recommend the strategy, but I brought my wife along so that she could tell me if I was smiling or not, and if I was smiling too much or not enough. And that really, it helped a little, so we got a little bit of a smile. But what I find is that I'm someone who, while I'm naturally, I feel warmth on the inside, I don't always project it well outwardly to people. And so I think it helps if you just have a few friends or people that you're close to who will give you a heads up whether or not you project a natural warmth on the outside. And sometimes that just means going out of your way to be a little more kind to people than is expected, pay a little more attention to people than is expected, be a little more generous with your thoughts or attention than might be expected. But charm itself goes a long way. If you can manage to be a senior leader who's also warm and charming, still tough. I mean, in today's world, particularly in your business, you've got to have a certain toughness about you. You've got to be able to make tough calls, make difficult decisions. You've got to be able to do all of that. But at the same time, if you can do it with a level of warmth and charm, that's what I see in the careers that absolutely accelerate and continue to accelerate for the rest of their lives. Because it's the thing that's hardest to find, tough people who are actually warm human beings. And I've got my contact information here. So if you reach a point where you just want to stay in touch, if you have questions, really anything, particularly the blog at workplacepoker.com, anytime I get new stories that people let me share, I'm posting stories there and doing everything I can just to make this part of an ongoing dialogue and conversation. So with that, I think we're done. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.